we wanted to bring you on for a little bit about Alabama, South Florida. And, last year it was something you don't see.
Mm-hmm.
Group of 5 team keeping it close with Alabama until the tail end of the fourth quarter. What was your take from that game last year?
Well, it was such a shock, and if you remember at the time, Alabama was coming off a super rare non-conference loss to Texas just the week prior, and that was a game in Tuscaloosa. So that Bama was coming off a week that was very uncharacteristic to them, especially in the Saban era, losing a September matchup. And I think it was just overlooking South Florida after that disappointing loss to Texas, because Alabama benched Jalen Milroe for that game, and what unfolded was just a disaster at quarterback for the Crimson Tide. And I'm gonna pull up the stats right now. I think they barely hit 100 passing yards in that game. Yeah, they had 107 passing yards on 10 of 23 showing. It got ugly there. They Tyler Buckner and Ty Simpson both rotated in a quarterback, and South Florida's blitz was too much for the Crimson Tide to handle in that game. It was weird to see Alabama lose a battle in the trenches when on offense, and South Florida was dialing up safety blitzes. Daquan Evans, who's no longer with the team, he had 3 sacks in that game, and Alabama didn't really move the ball very well in the run game either. I think their first 5 possessions of the game were all punts before they got a field goal right before the half to tie things at 3-3 apiece. Then in the second half, it was closer than the 17-3 score suggests, because South Florida, with about 6 minutes left, had a chance to, in Alabama territory, for the tie or the win, and Byron Brown just tossed like a Hail Mary on 1st and 10. Ill-advised play, and Alabama intercepted it and then scored the ceiling touchdown in the final minute.
Yeah, it was like, it kind of felt like I was watching Jim Leavitt South Florida, honestly. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Is Jim Leavitt back at coaching or something? But then we see like Alex Golish, like I know that you and Johnny were talking about just now. He's been doing a tremendous job over there. I'm loving it. I mean, that school, I believe, has never won a conference title in its school history.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge.
Yeah, they had that 2007 season where they hit as high as number 2 in the nation with Matt Grothe and George Selvey as some of the stars of that team, but they kind of folded late in the season. And yeah, the 2010s were pretty brutal after 2017 with South Florida, and the early 2020s were too. Until last year, they had the longest streak of FBS losses in the country. I think they had 18 straight before they beat Rice in late September. So South Florida, going into last season, they were not a team that was on anyone's radar. They lost by 17 points to Western Kentucky in week 1, and it looked like it was just going to be another bad South Florida team. But Alex Golesh's offense, they improved as the year progressed. Byron Brown, they finally found their number 1 quarterback, who was one of 2 quarterbacks, along with Heisman winner Jaden Daniels, to have 3,000 passing yards and 800 rushing yards last year. So a talented dual threat option. And then at the end of the season, they're winning a bowl game 45-0 over Syracuse, getting an ACC win. So that was a pretty notable win for South Florida. The problem is the defense.
And over the offseason, they have brought in a lot of transfer players. I think they have 6 or 7 on the offensive side, 6, 7, 8 on the defensive side. I mean, it's heavy with the transfer. And I don't even think the first team, second team, I don't even think they have a freshman that's playing. And so they're really senior dominated, a lot of transfer seniors, redshirt, seniors. And so they have a lot of experience, and that counts for a little bit. And so they're going to come in. And so Alabama needs to, like I said, sometimes you get lucky. We got lucky with Western Kentucky this week, and it was, it turned in what it was, but usually it's not that case. And that's not the case, but they're very senior oriented, and so better be prepared.
Yeah, and the transfers don't even include
too. Quarterback Byram, he's back too. Did a great job last year, so it'll be a challenge.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. So it's like we're gonna see Alabama, South Florida playing each other in Tuscaloosa. Like, what's the mood for South Florida going into this Saturday at 6 p.m. at night?
I bet they're hungry. I bet it's going to be
no biscuit on defense again. I think you really have. South Florida defense is a Jekyll and Hyde unit. I mean, last year they gave up 56 points to Florida Atlantic, 56 points to UAB, but then you have them shutting out Syracuse in a bowl game and holding Alabama to 3 first-half points and 17. So how is South Florida's defense so different on a week-to-week basis? And I think that's just game planning. I think they come out in some of these games just super aggressive, and I think that's what they did in the Alabama game last year. They pulled out every punch. They threw a ton of blitzes at Alabama, just basically tried to dominate that line of scrimmage and make Alabama's quarterbacks as uncomfortable as possible. And it worked.
They did a good job with that. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
He was both of them very unsettled, very unsettled. You watch your feet, not very confident.
Yeah, so I think that has to be the game plan again. This time, though, you have Jalen Milroe. That is a huge difference from what the quarterback situation was at Alabama last year. You have a quarterback that the coaching staff's confident in, his teammates are comfortable with, and I think that's going to be a big change. And the setting changes to Tuscaloosa this year, where Alabama doesn't really lose many non-conference games, with that Texas game last year being an exception.
Y'all remember the last non-conference game Alabama lost? I hope I'm right with this. I was there. The reason I know it.
Was it ULM?
It was Louisiana Monroe.
07, yep.
La Monroe.
And the last Power 5, well, now Power 4, but the last Power 5 non-con game that we lost at home was against Oklahoma in 03.
And I was at that game.
Jason
that was Shula.
Yep. That was an awful, terrible era.
And that's when they were losing to UCF and NIU and all of that.
Yeah.
Oh man. Like,
free agency. Build your team.
Yep, for sure. But yeah, it was. So I'm wondering who the players are to watch out for from South Florida. And it's for those who haven't really looked at South Florida all that much, but some that want to learn a little bit about them. Steve, who are the guys to look out for?
We kind of touched on Byron Brown already. I said he was one of 2 quarterbacks last year for 3,000 passing yards, 800 rushing yards, and he is South Florida's offense. Last year, he had 92 rushing yards in this game, and that didn't even count the 4 sacks that he took. And that is, I think, South Florida's biggest problem is their protection of Byron Brown, where he's going to have to be running for his life so often, on the move, scrambling. And I mean, there were games like he took 6 sacks against Temple last year. So South Florida's offensive line definitely needs to show improvement. He only took 1 in the opener against an FCS team, although the second team offensive line gave up 2 additional sacks to Bethune-Cookman. So I think Byron Brown is someone you're going to have to watch for because he's electrifying. He is one of probably the 3 closest QBs we have currently in college football to Lamar Jackson in terms of what he can do with his feet. I think another one we were about to see tonight in Thomas Castellanos for Boston College. But Byron Brown, he's going to be such a big factor in how South Florida's offense does, because I think he kept drives long enough last year where South Florida ended up going for 6 fourth downs in that game. He sustained a few drives. I know they only put up 3 points, but South Florida's offense, they did more, I'd say, like, if you watch the game, than what showed up in the box score. Just due to what
he was a freshman last year, wasn't
he? He was, I think, a redshirt freshman, because at the end of the 2022 season, he started like a Thursday night game against Tulsa, and that's where they really found his potential. Yeah. But I'd say one other guy you really need to watch on offense is Sean Atkins. He's been a wide receiver. I feel like he's a 6th, 7th year senior at this point, wearing number 38, very unique receiver number. He had 4 catches last week in the opener, but he was a nearly 1,000-yard guy last year for South Florida as the team's leading receiver. So I think that Sean Atkins is somebody that you're going to have to look for, but it depends on how much Alabama really allows time to pass, because Byron Brown didn't really have that much in last year's matchup. He finished 14 of 28, only completed half his throws, and the throws that he did complete were pretty much dump offs to the flats, only finished with 87 yards, which is averaging 3 yards per pass. So Byron Brown really needs some time to throw to his receivers, and I think the offensive line is going to be the X factor in this one.
Yeah, it's going to be, we're going to have to keep an eye on the O-line. That is for sure. Mm-hmm. But, looking at this game as a whole, what is your prediction for this game exactly?
What's the spread? I'm going to say it's not going to be close, I don't think.
Well,
I mean, the spread this past Saturday, Western Kentucky, the spread started at 31.5, and then by game time, it was almost 35. So the money was really, flowing on that one right there.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll see another 63-0 win, but I could see something like 52-13 in this one. I don't think it'll be close like last year's matchup. Funny enough, I think the South Florida team is better than the one that they had last year. But I just think that Alabama needs to make a statement after that near scare last year on the road. With this one being back at home, Alabama really having, other than the penalties you mentioned earlier against Western Kentucky, it felt like a near perfect game for Alabama, with WKU barely getting over 100 yards, Bama having 600, with just some long touchdowns and breakout plays on offense throughout the entire game. The emergence of Ryan Williams is a new threat at receiver after losing a lot of their receiving core last year. So I think that Alabama, I think it's going to be a domination in Bryant-Denny on Saturday.
Well, one thing too is nobody really needs to worry about the opening drive, the first drive. Most of all that is scripted. They already studied, know what defense you're going to line up and where in this formation, all that kind of stuff. Usually it's about second, maybe third drive. The scope of the game will be, we'll know by the probably third drive. We'll know, what to expect the rest of the game. But the first, it's always scripted and it's always planned and fast and all that kind of stuff. So look for the second, third drive. We'll know what's going to happen with this game.
Yeah, South Florida is going to attack with tempo, but I don't know if their possessions are short, that could be really detrimental to their defense, just putting the defense on the field after some super quick possessions. I mean, South Florida, I think they ran the most snaps per game in the country last year, and they run similar to what Alex Golesh ran at Tennessee. They'll do the stacked receivers on the side. They'll do just no huddle, get to the line of scrimmage as soon as possible. And it's an offense which has worked for Golesh in the past before, but there are, just like everything, there's benefits and there's also risks. And I think one of the risks is your defense can get really gassed if your offense isn't putting together long drives.
Yeah, exactly. So it goes both ways. It does. It can be a benefit or it can, definitely hurt you. But we'll know second, third series. We'll know the flow of the game.
Oh yeah. I mean, we'll definitely know by then. But I am wondering about like the rest of South Florida's season though. And Steve, what do you think? Do you think that South Florida can be that team that wins the American Athletic Conference, or is it too early to say? Because what I'll do is pull up the schedule. We can see what you think.
I actually voted them number 2 in the preseason AAC media poll, putting them above UTSA and Tulane, which most people put UTSA and Tulane as their 2 and 3 behind Memphis. So I do like this South Florida team a lot, and I think the continuity quarterback is one thing, and I think that the team's going to improve defensively because last year I mentioned those UAB and FAU losses where they inexplicably allowed 56 points. So their defense was not great last year, although Alabama fans might think it was from that one game. But South Florida really needs to make strides on that end. They have, I think, 3 transfers in the starting lineup, and then you have maybe your best defender in Ben Knox at cornerback. He'll have a busy day on Saturday guarding those Alabama wide receivers, but Ben Knox might be the best defender on that team. Missed all of last year due to an injury, so that's a big return. As far as the non-conference schedule, I think most people are expecting a 2-2 finish there, with Miami, Florida looking as good as they did after routing the Gators on Saturday. But that game is at Raymond James Stadium, and I think that's a game that South Florida could compete in. I mean, we've seen Miami lose those kinds of games before, so I think South Florida, they'll have a shot at that one. But then the non-conference schedule starts super brutal with Tulane and Memphis as your first 2 opponents. I mean, you could be 2-4 there, but I do think that they get one of those as a win. Having Memphis at home certainly helps. I know the Tigers are the AAC favorites, but Memphis does have to go on the road at Tulane, at South Florida, and at UTSA. So South Florida has a benefit of an easier non-conference schedule than the Tigers, and they get to avoid UTSA in the process. So South Florida, I think they could be competing for the AAC championship game come the first week of December if we see some defensive improvement, because I think that this offense that Alex Golesh really has potential.